By Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, India's Executive Director of the IMF in Washington, D.C. I would like to invite Counsel General Somnath Ghosh to please make it.
And happy Diwali, forthcoming Diwali in a couple of days. Thank you for coming. It's a busy day. I know I do it every day. City, center. Coming to city center, many of you must have driven 1.5 hours. So thank you for coming. We expect about 100, those who have confirmed, despite Dhanteras today. And we hope that most of them will come here. So the reason they will come is that on Dhanteras we of course search and hope for and pray for our own individual wealth. But today we are going to understand from Krishnamurthy Subramanian, Professor Krishnamurthy Subramanian, what wealth India is going to have in next 25 years, slightly more. What the Viksit Bharat will look like and how we can go there, reach there, and what the Amrit Kal will be like, the run towards 2047, the centenary of independence for world largest country, world largest democracy. So today it's a distinct pleasure. Thank you for joining us, Professor Krishnamurthy Subramanian, to release his book. Is already available. His book, India at 100, Envisioning Tomorrow's Economic Powerhouse.
Analysis probably not, the reports are not so elaborate as these two one and many other comments. The Goldman Sachs report says they project India that by 2047, India will reach just about 22 trillion in US dollar terms. The third largest, of course, at that time. Even now, we are third largest in.
Whether this will continue for a long term in economic growth. The Ernst & Young report, which came towards the end of 2022, they hope that India in 2047 will be about 26 trillion. They don't talk about further, with per capita income about 6 times from the present level. So boosting manufacturing and exports they talk about, and they hope that India will really join the global supply chain, particularly in the circumstances that we see now, creating jobs and driving exports. The infrastructure development, which has taken a tempo that will continue, they hope. Financial inclusion and innovation, which on which the government really pays a lot of attention. Ernst & Young also talks about certain risk. Regulatory challenges once again, inequality and poverty reduction in a better in an accelerated manner. Energy security, for some reason they also talk about energy security. There are many other report comments from the individual, from different organizations, which are very important.
They take a short presentation. I captured this thought that Somnath ji mentioned. There's a Gujarati slogan which basically goes as Nishan Chook Maaf, Nahi Maaf, Nichu Nishan. In Gujarati, what it means is basically that one can pardon you for missing a target, but we won't pardon you for having a very, very underwhelming target. And I think that's a spirit that actually has not only driven this book, but my work, in the government of India. And there's a reason I'll share. I joined as a chief economic advisor in 2018. My very first press conference was one where India's GDP, declined to 5.3%, and then before COVID, it kept declining, and of course during COVID, the entire global economy, had difficult times. So my entire 3 years, actually, I was dealing with commentators, many of them, sitting here, being based here in the US, who took special, who took special, maybe pleasure, but maybe other sentiments in magnifying some of the some of the negative narratives that were being spoken about and that during that period, therefore, I actually realized, and something that I'm able to articulate it better, but it's been a philosophy that I've lived my life with, which is that for positive outcomes to manifest, positive thinking is necessary, but for negative outcomes to manifest, negative thinking is sufficient. And there are still a lot of people who are actually supplying this sufficiency condition. Therefore, I think the necessary condition of positive thinking is something that has to work harder. And that's the spirit. I'll give you just one specific example. For the media has, when one, like for instance, a lot of the narratives at that time before COVID, people said, oh, India's already hitting the middle income trap. Now 3%, 4% growth rate is here, with terms basically saying, X religion rate of growth, Y religion rate of growth, etc. being talked about. While all that actually, and I was very clear that there was nothing structurally wrong with the economy, and therefore when I was looking at the data, I knew that this was only because of the the restrictions on economic activities, and that the data was also revealing that. So the conceptual clarity together with the data made me actually predict that. But I can tell you, and I in all honesty, any prediction like that, especially when everybody else is actually saying, there's going to be a 25-30% decline for the year, many commentators, requires some leap of faith in some sense, and the risk of also possibly, having to suffer the fate of, having egg on your face. That's a risk. At that point in time, I actually felt that it's not just enough, it's not just, important for me to basically be an economic commentator, but I also had to display economic leadership at that point in time. And it's very easy to to sort of kick someone who's done, whether it's an institution or an individual, but actually it's much harder when an individual or an institution is going through tough times to actually lift that entity up and put a pat on the back and say, okay, you can do it. I think that's what leadership is. That's the difference between commentary and leadership. And I think one had to display that leadership at that difficult point in time. So in some sense, I guess that's the difference I've felt as an academic myself between an academic and a policy maker. A policy maker also has to display leadership at important points. So in some sense, therefore, and so 1970 to 1995, and I'm sure those of you who've tracked global economy for longer periods will definitely relate with what I'm talking about. From 1970 to 1995, the Japanese economy grew 26 times in nominal GDP, 25.6 to be precise. In 1970, it was about a $220 billion economy. By the time 1995 came, 25 years later, it was actually a $5.5 trillion economy. Second example I want to give you, and I actually am giving that example, second deliberately, is China. Because if I gave you that example first, you'll say, oh, that's not a democracy, not an apples to apples comparison. Of course, no country is ever an apples to apples comparison, but I actually want to use these as anchoring examples just to inspire. China from 1996 to 2021, again a 25-year period, grew its GDP nominal terms by 22 times. And I think if these countries can do it, and when somebody mentions 55 trillion, Somnath, I'm sure many of you might have actually been thinking, saying, I want to know what was this guy smoking when he was writing this book. Seems to be cool stuff. I want a bit of that. I'm sure there must be some of you who must have thought about it. Let me share with you that like that's my training. I've used very deeply thought conceptual arguments along with data to actually write this down. And if you take a look at the book, this is not, I wasn't smoking anything, while writing this down. And actually you'll see, ground up, I've built up, right from predicting India's, growth rate, potential growth rate, to thinking about what it'll basically be in dollar terms. And hopefully, some of you will find it interesting to go and check that out. So I'll just run you through for the next maybe 2-3 minutes some arithmetic over the next 25 years is for real growth of 8%. That's the main ask actually, and as hopefully I'll be able to persuade you, if we can grow at 8%, and there is of course a big if, and I'll spend time actually fleshing that out, whether we can indeed grow at 8%. That's the question that actually I reflected the most upon, and I will therefore share my thoughts on that. But if we can grow at 8%, we can be a $55 trillion economy in 2047. Let me explain to you. Let me just give you the sort of the arithmetic behind that. So 8% growth in real terms, 5% inflation, which is what I'm projecting, and I'll give you the economics behind each of these numbers. But let me just first lay out the arithmetic for you. 8% plus 5%, so 8% real growth, 5% inflation. That's 13% in nominal terms. 8 plus 5. I'm ignoring a multiplicative term which will actually add another 40 basis points, but I'm ignoring that. So 8 plus 5, 13% in nominal terms. Now, when one has to project GDP in dollar terms, I have to take into account what will be the rate of appreciation or depreciation of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar in the next 25 years. And in the book, I've estimated that if India grows in real terms at 8%, the nominal rate, the rate of depreciation, nominal rate of depreciation of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar will be about 0.5%. I'm going to round it off to 1% just for the sake of us being able to do the mental arithmetic. So now depreciation basically means that value or in dollar terms is actually will be lower. Depreciation reduces the value in dollar terms compared to the rupee. Therefore, I have to subtract that from the nominal rate of growth in rupee terms. So 13%, 8 plus 5, 8% real, 5% inflation. That's 13% in nominal rupee terms. 1% depreciation. So subtract that 1%, you get 13 minus 12, which is 12%. Okay. So I hope all of you with me. 12% in nominal dollar terms. By the way, all my estimations are in nominal, not in real terms. So rule of 72, something that most of us use to know, to basically know how many years it takes to double money. At 12%, rule of 72, basically 72 divided by 12 is 6. So at 12% rate of growth in nominal dollars, GDP doubles in nominal dollars every 6 years. 2023 to 2047 is a 24-year period. So, GDP doubling in nominal dollars as every 6 years means there'll be 4 doublings, right? 4 doublings means 2 into 2 into 2 into 2. That's 2 to the power 4, which is 16 times. So that's what basically the projection is. And if I take you explicitly through the numbers, in 2023, India's GDP was 3.28 trillion. I'll round it off to 3.25 so that we can do this arithmetic well. First doubling from 3.25 to 6.5. Second doubling from 6.5 to 13. Third doubling from 13 to 26. Fourth doubling from 26 to 52. We've done this without Excel, without calculators, basically but that's close to the $55 trillion number. So 4 doublings, basically doubling every 6 years at 12% in nominal terms. Now here, similarly, if you look at the last 30 years of growth since liberalization, and especially last 10 years, I think some very good performance based on that. So Sunil Gavaskar basically assessed based on that performance, saying that if Sachin, by the time he retires, does not score at least 15,000 international runs and at least 40 international hundreds, I'm going to personally go and strangle him. That's what, of course was a paternalistic statement assessing, Sachin's potential. But I think in a similar way, having looked at growth, with data, with basically these economic arguments, I'm convinced of India's potential. there's an equally important lesson in this example of Sachin that I gave you. Just because Sunil Gavaskar assessed Sachin's potential, Sachin did not score those hundreds, 50, 100 international hundreds and close to 30,000 runs just because of potential. He worked hard as well. And I think therein lies a very important lesson too, that, just because I'm assessing potential and I am taking the risk, Porto said, hey, you said 55 trillion, we're actually at 30 trillion, I'm already ready with my response to that question.
Improvement that often leads to lower employment because now people are more efficient and like the small scale enterprises or the small businesses who are less efficient are being replaced by the larger enterprises. How is this likely to play with the employment scenario in India?
That's a good question. A nice study published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, a journal that's published by Harvard University, showed this, a fact that I think is very germane to what you're speaking about. So if I plot on the x-axis, firm age, and on the y-axis I plot how much jobs are created, how many jobs are created. So it's like think about it as a horse race, where everybody, 5-year-old firms actually across countries are starting at the same point. This horse race is being run across 3 countries, India, US and Mexico. So suppose, let's say a 5-year-old firm in India creates 100 jobs. In the US also 100 jobs. By the time the firm becomes 30-year-old, another 25. Of course, I'm mentioning all this in average. There'll be, of course, variation there. By the time the firm turns into a 30-year-old, in the next 25 years, that US firm that actually was creating 100 jobs when it was a 5-year-old creates 700 jobs when it's a 30-year-old. What's the number for India? That number is 140. And increases its FDI, twice or maybe thrice as well, we'll get to 5%, which is still a fraction of 30%. It's still very domestic. Third, government spending is endogenous, actually something that the government chooses clearly domestic as well. So when you start, looking at these quantitatively and analyzing, if I were in an MBA class, I would basically tell my students how I am a baat karo. Okay, ready, go.
Namaskar, wonderful evening. Dhan Teras. So we have thought of making Bharat ko dhanman.
Dhani.
Yeah. Dhanwan. Dhani. And this is a big sacrifice for the people, those who have come, as the Consul General did mention. But when it comes to the role for our Janam Bhumi, it is important for us to contribute.
Yep.
You just visioned, and you are saying that 55 trillion, 2047, India at 100. And no dream is small, to be honest. And there is no harm in dreaming. And you came up with a lot of statistics also that how it is possible. And we have seen it. You did compare with Japan. You did compare with China. My only concern when we talk about the productivity that we're talking about, formalization. There is a lot of things when we're seeing in India, new innovations, So there was a report they were talking about, like very new innovators are coming.
Yes.
But when you talk about the success rate, you don't see that much. So what have you thought?
See, that is actually intrinsic to any innovation. Even if you look at in Silicon Valley, this phenomenon of a failed entrepreneur is very common. It's just, in general, innovation, is a phenomenon where success rate is very low. When you become successful, you actually, end up becoming very, very rich and, making a contribution as well. So when you look at the overall success rates for startups in India, it's not any different from that across the globe. So that's just the phenomenon of, innovation and entrepreneurship. And as you were rightly saying, today a lot of the startups are also looking to solve India's problems for India. At Indian price points and India scale. I think this is something that I always mention. It's not enough to be able to solve a problem for a country, small country, maybe like a Singapore or maybe, you have to be able to solve problems at India scale. And I think that many of the startups are starting to do. So I'm quite optimistic that, entrepreneurship will drive a lot of productivity growth in India. As I was saying, from 2004 to 2014, using World Bank data, the rate of new firm creation was only 3.2%. From 2014 onwards, it's orders of magnitude higher, using World Bank data, not government data. And as a result, India today has the third largest entrepreneurial ecosystem with more than 120 unicorns. On innovation as well, as I was saying, we basically used to be 85th ranked in 2015. Today we are 39th. So there is a lot of momentum, good policies that have been implemented over the last 10 years. And therefore, I'm incredibly optimistic about entrepreneurship, driving productivity growth and thereby, helping to make India dhanwan.
Let's make Bharat Dhanwan together. When we talk about Honorable Prime Minister Modi, his vision for Bharat, what he says, Amrit Kal, and everyone has to contribute.
Yep.
So it's not about that you can just talk about it, but how you can just do it and be part of this journey of rising Bharat, which was Sone ki Chidiya at a time, and we can bring it now with the diamond-studded Sona, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it is doable, it is possible.
Yeah.
So I have one question to you, which will be the concluding note. Let me hear from you, because sitting here, the diaspora is contributing a lot, and Prime Minister always acknowledges that with me standing. Rakeshji, we were together 2 months ago in New York. So investment part of it. And there are a lot of states, those who are opening up.
Correct.
Earlier it was, and it is becoming doing business at very ease.
Correct.
So how easy it is?
I think this is one area where India has certainly, done well in the last 10 years. If you look at, I'll again quote data, the World Bank's ease of doing, business rankings, where India used to be ranked 146 in 2014. When the ease of doing business rankings were closed by World Bank, India was actually in the 60s. So from ranked in the 140s to 60s is significant movement. But again, I actually, if you ask me, I'm not happy with India being in the 60s. We should be targeting to be in the top 20. And that's where a lot of states need to be starting, need to actually focus on. And I think this is an aspect that I have emphasized as well, which is that while the central government actually has been doing reforms, and especially over the last 10 years, it's now the responsibility of states to start doing reforms. For instance, if you looked at the farm laws, etc., states were talking about their power. But we know very well that power and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. So when states talk about their power, they, I think, need to actually own up to their responsibility to do the reforms, to do the reforms as well. And that is what will help India actually move into the top 20, in the ease of doing business. As I was telling you earlier as well, I actually remain incredibly impatient, on reforms. And I think precisely to the first part of your question, Angus Madison's book, Oxford University Press book, showed that is actually this idea of, Sone ki Chidiya is not some dream. India accounted for at least 1/3 of world's GDP consistently every year, every decade, every century up until 1750 AD, at least 1/3. And just to give us a comparison, the country that we are here in the United States, actually for the last 75 years, when it's been the global leader, has accounted for about, on average, 27-28%. So think about it, actually, for 3/4 of a century versus 17.5 centuries, and on average 27-28% versus minimum 33%. That's what, and for those critics who actually say, oh, it happened only because of the population, I think it's important to keep in mind that during those times, the population moved to places that offered prosperity. Population was not random. So I think this is something, and there are many commentators who often want to actually, whenever something positive, fact is mentioned about, they want to look for, some of the negatives in the positive itself. And therefore, to that audience, I actually want to point out that the population was something that was not random. So we cannot dismiss the fact that India accounted for such large proportions of world GDP just by saying, oh, it was because of population, because population responded to prosperity. So I think that is what India did, and it's important to keep in mind, India did that by pursuing trade, wealth creation, thinking about wealth creation as a boon, not as a bane, as it happened during the socialist era. And I think this is something which is actually, I mentioned anecdotally, if you look at, all of us do that. I think now Dhanteras, for instance, today we'll go and do Lakshmi Puja, right? What do we write there actually in the altar? We write Shubh Labh. Basically do good and create profits out of that, and yet we had a narrative actually back during the socialist era talking about profit as a dirty word, which actually harmed our country a lot. And I think we have to get back to that. That is what our DNA is, of thinking about entrepreneurship and trade and private sector activity as basically contributors to welfare. And I think India, under the able leadership of the current Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister Modi, is actually indeed getting back to to that. And I think thinking about wealth creation as a boon, not as a bane.
Thank you so very much. Happy Dhanteras.
My pleasure, and I wish you all a very happy Diwali, happy Dhanteras, and tomorrow Narak Chaturdashi, and Diwali as well, day after tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Shubhla.
Shubhla.
Rakesh, many more to come like these. I think this is an initiative launching books. When we talk about India, your passion has always been there. We see that. Let's hear from you.
See, first of all, thank you so much. And, I've been listening to your questions, very articulative questions, and the response from Professor was very, very insightful. See, today, people will not believe that 55 trillion is possible. But, as I said, if you think you can, if you think you cannot, you are right. The question is that what stops us in dreaming big? And we need to dream big. If we don't dream, it won't happen. If we dream, it will happen. So we thought that it is good for the global Indian diaspora to meet the professor and, listen to the insight for the blueprint under this book, India at 100, and which he has given reasons for us to believe. And again, the onus is not on his. The ask is, can we do 8% GDP or not? And 8% GDP is the result of how we do as a diaspora, how we do as an Indian in terms of innovation, in terms of entrepreneurship, and in terms of contributing to the economy by paying the taxes. So I feel this is a very good moment and a great day to discuss about the wealth on a Dhanteras. So all the TV Asia people and to the media, I will wish happy Diwali, a Shubh Deepavali. And I feel I can take this opportunity to say Diwali is Diwali, irrespective of any religion, any bhasha, anywhere. We should always say Shubh Diwali. There is no acronym or there is no synonym for Diwali. We should all say Diwali and Shubh Diwali.
Shubh Deepavali. Dhanyavad. Thank you.